My name is Nancy Slater, and I'm here to talk about the 2013 New Beginnings campaign of taking the first step. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how my steps have led me to this very day. I'm a domestic violence survivor. I left an abusive 4-year marriage in 2005, and I was bruised, battered, beaten, full of guilt and shame over what had happened to me. My doctor gave me the phone number of New Beginnings, and I called them and joined a support group through the Community Advocacy Program, or CAP, and that saved my life. I learned self-care, I learned self-worth, I learned safety planning, and I took those first steps toward healing back in 2005. I took some more steps in 2006 when I became a volunteer at New Beginnings, and I joined a group of survivors who were able to speak publicly about domestic violence through the New Beginnings Social Change Program. Over these last years, I have filmed public service announcements, I've done interviews, I've told my story in the hopes of telling society the warning signs of domestic violence, of educating our society that it is not the victim's fault, that no one deserves to be hurt, and what society can do to help eradicate this issue in our families of family violence. This year, in 2013, I took a remarkably interesting first step and was invited to speak within the prison walls at Monroe State Prison to a classroom of men, inmates, who had committed violent actions. It was a remarkable thing to even consider that a victim, a survivor, would go behind prison walls and speak to a classroom full of perpetrators. Therese Todd and myself from Thrivers Action Group, or TAG, went into prison. We were invited there by a volunteer instructor through University Beyond Bars, Linda Olson, who works for Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The students in the class had requested stories, a panel of victims. They wanted to hear firsthand through their classroom work on what their actions had done to victims, what the effect of their actions had been. She did not want to do a victims panel because victims panels tend to re-victimize everyone. But she knew that the members of TAG were experienced storytellers, could handle questions and answers, could do this without being re-victimized, so we were invited. I was eager to make history and take this wonderful 2013 step. I was very nervous entering the prison walls. It's rather heart-wrenching when you hear the doors slam behind you and you know that you're locked within the razor wire. We were escorted to the classroom. We were seated, and in front of us were 20 men who were respectfully, cautiously, really checking us out. They just wanted to know who we were. And we, Therese and I, in turn, were examining them as well. Therese told her story. I told my story. And then we went into a question and answer portion to complete the 2 hours of classroom work. I was amazed at their reaction. I was amazed that this audience of perpetrators was so sensitive to family violence and eager to learn more about what their actions do to families and to friends. It was an interesting discussion as we talked about what they wanted to see in society, the changes that they wanted to make, that they thought they could make. One young man admitted to us that he was serving a 7-year term for domestic violence, and he watched our reaction to that announcement. He and I discussed perpetrator treatment. Did I think it worked? He was very eager to make those changes because he wanted to reestablish a relationship with his wife and be able to watch his son grow up. He had served 5.5 years of his sentence and was eager for those changes. He wanted to start a program called Batterers Anonymous, a nationwide program with a hotline for men to call when they got angry before they committed a violent act. I found this remarkable. As we were leaving the prison, other steps and other changes took place within me as I was processing these men who sat through 2 hours, who stood up and formed a single line and came and shook our hands and thanked us for being there because they felt it was so important and worthwhile. On the way back from the prison as we were driving, Linda then shared with us who we had actually been speaking to. One young man, and not the only one in tears, was in tears through my story. He was serving a sentence for shooting his sister's perpetrator. She had recently gone back to the perpetrator, and he was having difficulty managing his anger and understanding why a victim would go back time and time again. It was disclosed to us by Linda that 3 of the men over in the back corner, the most quiet, soft-spoken of all of them, were in for life. One was in for life for killing his wife and his sister-in-law. I was so amazed that my first step had not only exposed me face-to-face with perpetrators, but it also exposed me to men who were serving life sentences for heinous crimes. And I had prejudged, just like society prejudges what the normal, typical victim looks like, acts like, and should do. I had prejudged what a lifer looked like. As we were waiting for the yard to be cleared of inmates so that we could be escorted to the classroom, I saw lifers. I saw who I thought were lifers. I judged them by their attitude, by their body English, by the way that they walked, by their tattoos, by their long hair. And yet, I was as guilty as society for prejudging, because here sat in front of us men who wanted to make changes, men who realized the reaction and the results of their actions, and they wanted to make society better. It was an amazing historic experience being behind the walls of Monroe Prison and taking that first step in 2013 that for me was historic and life-changing and ethically changing about my prejudgments and predeterminations. I encourage everyone within our community, and particularly you who are seeing this film, to also take a first step. Join this First Step campaign for New Beginnings. It doesn't have to be a monumental, save the world, enter prisons step. It can be simply talking to a survivor, simply stating that you're a survivor, simply talking about domestic violence and what can be done, or even simply listening. Take that first step. I encourage each and every one of you. Once you do, the second steps will be easier, and that walk toward ending domestic violence will be terrific.